Welcome to our People Tech Talks. I have with me today Josephine. She's the co-founder of CompensationIQ, which is a salary benchmarking tool. And we are going to learn all about how she landed in the HR tech space. I'd love to warmly welcome you.
Great to be here.
To start with, you telling me a little bit about how you ended up in the HR tech space.
Well, it's quite a story. I mean, to keep it brief, I've always been in technology. I worked in, marketing agency land and marketing tech a long time ago, back when it was called new media. That's how old and grey it is. But
New media.
it's new media. That's what it was called. And I just love how technology helps. And it's always been a passion of mine. And I got to work on some phenomenal products and some phenomenal projects in these tech businesses. And about 7 years ago, I'd sort of been reevaluating how I fitted into these scale ups and startups and everything in London. And I was doing a lot of work at the time. And interestingly, an HR tech company reached out and they had a COO role and they wanted someone who'd been in tech before, but could also lead a people process systems part of the business, which is pretty much what I'd been doing in various other places. So I landed 7 years ago in an HR tech company, leading the people ops function and helping them through their journey.
So you weren't building HR tech at that time. You were rather leading and building internally how that company would function. And so you probably had to experience salary benchmarking at some point.
I did. I mean, I've got a horror story of 5 different spreadsheets with department leads, trying to make sure the data is segmented, trying to make sure everybody's looking at the same kind of sources, and then having, those big debates about why my friend at Google gets this and I should be paid this, which is not a relevant benchmark. We weren't as big as Google. But I think that's a key thing is that with my tech experience, I could obviously work with management team on the evolution of how we build teams to build a tech business. And I worked a lot with the customer success, so answering questions around engagement and well-being and all the people initiatives that go on. And then in my day job, I was doing that, right? I'd have to walk into a room once a month and talk about our attrition and absence KPIs and our engagement index and, what the people initiatives were. So I was always using HR tech and I was working at an HR tech company. And I think what was interesting about it is that Alex, my co-founder, and I sort of always bonded over, we worked together at the previous place as well. We bonded over this idea of making it easier, making things more accessible. Life is hard. HR people are always in spreadsheets. Why are we in spreadsheets when technology exists? And I'm a technologist at heart, so I demand a lot from the products I use. And so that's essentially, I've sort of segued immediately into how CompensationIQ came about. It was this idea of, I was standing in rooms and with our customers of our previous HR tech platform. And, you ask 3 things in that room with the management team when you're presenting any of those numbers. It's what's the number? How has it changed over time? And is it good or bad versus companies like us? And that good or bad versus companies like us is benchmarking, pure and simple. And there's all sorts of flavors of benchmarking in HR tech and HR landscape. But when it comes to the people experience and those moments that matter in the year, one of the most fraught times of the year is when you are doing that pay and performance review cycle. Salary is very important to people for a reason. And it's stressful having to understand, what is your pay philosophy and which data sources are you going to look at and how are you going to structure how everybody engages with the data you find, and are you going to get challenged on the data you find, which, often always happens. So benchmarking is critical, and a key part of the year is, and also when you're hiring, is that salary benchmarking piece and making sure you've got what you need, because I needed to have what I needed. So that's how Alex and I came about with CompensationIQ.
It makes so much sense to have benchmarking data. I mean, I have been in the same position, thousands of spreadsheets trying to align, having only internal benchmarks, so only really looking at your own pay and how that's changed over time, and not really external benchmarks, which doesn't really help. It doesn't help with the story. It doesn't help with the understanding on the other side. And I think that as an employee, I've never seen that really done well, like this compensation philosophy and really having that data that made sense to me as an employee. Even though I was in teams, trying to build that, it was very, very difficult to sometimes get the buy-in to get products like CompensationIQ, to get the benchmarking data in. It wasn't always easy to get what we wanted signed off. But once we had it, then they were like, oh, that was a good return on investment. Like that is needed because it takes away so much of the ambiguity. It gives understanding. And that's why I think comp is like the most important thing in a business. Like you go to work to get paid. You need to understand what you're getting paid. So you came about Compensation IQ. You wanted to solve a problem. And well, wait, how did you come up with the name Compensation IQ? That's interesting. That's actually is there something to it?
Yeah, so Alex and I are different, which is good. He uses the word governance. I use the word ways of working. He's very clever. I'm very operational. I don't have a lot of time. So I was like, let's just call it salary benchmarking. And he was like, no, we're actually delivering some intelligence and we're making life a bit easier. And so all credit to him. He ignored my operational approach and was like, no, compensation IQ, because it's about the intelligence that goes with compensation. You can look at a number on a spreadsheet or a number in our product. You still need some intelligence around it. Like, what does it mean and how contextually relevant is it? So compensation IQ is all due to Alex's brilliant.
Oh, I love that. I love the premise of it. That you're not just bringing a number. And I think that's important with data. A lot of people look at data and they're like, they just want the number. It's nothing to do with the number. It's to do with, like you said, the context around that number. It's the insights that number gives you to enable decision-making in a business. And if you can have the right data, it means you can make good decisions because you have good insights.
Yeah.
You can do it fast. You do it quickly and you're not going to spin around wondering if the data is do we have the data? Where's the data?
Staring at it, asking it to tell you what it means. Yes, we've been there.
Yeah, I've been there too. It's fun. So tell me a little bit more about the product. What is it that, we're obviously you're trying to solve things in the comp space. What are the biggest challenges that you think this product solves? Why this topic for you? Why you specifically, you're a co-founder of this business. This must be a passion thing for you. Why comp?
Yeah, why comp? It's not totally the reason I started it, but it's kind of similar. I ended up in a salary review conversation that went horribly wrong years and years and years ago, and I've kind of never forgotten it. And when we look at the problem we're solving, again, it's my day job to do this. So I've got to make sure we know what we're going to hire at, and that the EU pay transparency is coming, and do we have our reporting ready? So a huge amount of it is that, the time it takes me to get through that kind of stuff pre this product was painful. And you mentioned it earlier about, justifying the spend on the investment with HR and people up. It's like we're the least invested in team in business. A marketing person walks in and says, if I have Asana, I'm going to save 3 hours and then I can spend it on, the strategy. And everybody goes, great, buy Asana. With HR, I think they're used to us being in spreadsheets and kind of making our own graphs and sourcing things. But what's interesting about compensation is, who are they? Harvard Business Review. I think they had a stat 87.6% of HR people will report having used a salary survey or salary data source at some point in the businesses they're in. And they're great because it gives you that number, that banding, that range, and hopefully the insight. And insight is about context, right? It's got to be your industry, your company size, your stage of growth. All these factors change compensation in an organization. And it's very difficult for employees and staff to understand that, right? So, people will go out and purchase a salary data source. And then the first problem is it doesn't actually quite cover everything you need, or the flavor of businesses you're looking at in the data set aren't quite like you, which immediately means you sit in a management meeting and your CFO will go, well, they're at a different turnover than us, or they're at a different funding round than us. So those data points are not relevant. So you spent this money. Somebody said yes to your ask for budget, only to find your missing roles. And then that puts you back into the world of, well, let me go to Google, let me phone a recruiter friend, let me get a PDF from somewhere else in my email. You know how we get all those salary survey things from recruiters. So you haven't solved the problem properly. You don't have the data coverage is the first problem. And then the second problem is you've got back to the time issue, right? You're now, because you don't have all the data, you're losing time trying to find more data. And at the end of it is a human being who's sitting in a performance and pay review, or a potential job applicant who's trying to join your business. There's a human there who's expecting you to get it right. So it's very stressful. So that's the first problem is data coverage. How do we solve that problem? Well, we're not a single source of salary data, we actually combine 3 different data sources in the platform. So we've got a salary survey provider. So that gives you what has been paid. It's got good coverage, like great for majority of industries, fantastic when you get to certain countries. We've got the self-reported data, which is what is being paid at the moment, which shows you what people in bum and seat are getting as their salary and comp. And then we've got job postings data, which shows you what the market tends to pay. It also gives you an insight into like emerging skills, kind of new job titles. My favorite is a couple of years ago, the UK went wild for chief happiness officers as a job title, which is great. I know that's a CHRO or an HRD, depending on what size of business you're in. So the postings data gives you a good idea of what's coming down the line in terms of skills. And I read a fantastic, it's not to make the stat and fact heavy, but I was reading something about skills development and compensation, and there was this insight with 65% of primary school children are going to work in jobs that don't exist yet in terms of skills.
Wow.
So, skills change rapidly, and we can see that, and it's driven a lot by tech. So those are like biggest problem, data coverage, we feel we solve by having 3 different data sources in one platform. And then we get back to what happens when you actually do the work of trying to match a benchmark role salary to your internal role. Aside from the fact you could have weird and wonderful job titles, you're looking at ranges. You're trying to make it as relevant as possible for industry, size, location, etc. But then in the olden days, you were doing that in spreadsheets, right? I go back to the 5 different department heads, 5 different spreadsheets. Trying to make sure everybody's filling it in with the pay philosophy in mind and understanding what they're looking at. We've decided to make sure that that's as simple as possible because I want everything on my screen. We map the benchmarks to the headcount. So you get these lovely little graphs and reports that show you all your roles, compa ratio, which is how far off the median of benchmark you are, gender, etc. It's kind of all in one place. So you don't have to go backwards and forwards between spreadsheets. You just got it there. And that ultimately saves me time. And that's the biggest problem I have is time. HR people ops are incredibly time poor.
I can feel all of that. I feel all of that very deeply, having been, leading compensation rounds and the amount of time that they take. And it's really the data crunching takes a long time. The insights take some time. So if there can be something to speed that up and to make it as accurate as possible and give the most amount of context, I think that's really valuable for business. I really love how simple it can be to go from like spreadsheets and chaos and not being able to answer questions to, oh, actually, I have the numbers, and how good that feels. Like how good it feels in HR to be like, I know what I'm talking about. I got the numbers. And then people on the other side of that conversation, like you said, that really anxiety-inducing conversations that people have, you can feel really good stepping into that and prepared.
It's just all those conversations, like you've got to be able to at some point get buy-in from the wider department heads, team leads, etc., as to like, this is the data we're using, right? And to be able to say like, here are the companies in it. But one of my favorites is your heads of engineering are always delightful. They'll come in with like, this is the salary for a chief data scientist. We need a data scientist. They're very expensive. And here's, what I found on the internet somewhere. And you're able to say, that's fantastic. However, here is all the companies I'm looking at for that role. And these are the ones that look most like us. And it's irrefutable. I always tell my teams, whoever commands the data controls the conversation. And it's so nice to be able to have the data, to be able to back up everything you're trying to get through and make sure that it's consistent, it's reliable, there's that buy-in from everyone. We all believe we've got what we need to make this a successful kind of conversation, which is what you're after at the end of the day. Because, in like 6 months' time, you're going to run an engagement survey and you're going to hear if you got it wrong very quickly.
Very, very
Actually,
quickly.
You'll see it before. You'll have a higher attrition rate if you got it wrong, right? So, all of these things are connected.
Exactly. Yeah, and this just makes life so much easier when you're in HR and starts to answer those questions. Whether the business is always questioning HR, like you're not doing what we need you to do. You don't have the business acumen, whatever. Like I think this like starts to level up people's respect and understanding of the function and the effort that, goes into what they do if you have the data. So I think that's why these tools are, there's so many positives to having these tools in the business. If anyone is out there and does not have a comp tool, please go and check out CompensationIQ in Stacked. They're listed. You can also go check them out on the web. You can also reach out to Josephine. She's very lovely. As you can see, she's open to talk. If you're looking, then there's solutions out there. So we are going to finish up talking with Josephine because it's been wonderful. And again, thank you so much for joining and talking to the Stacked community.
Thanks, Jessie.
Thank you. We're so happy to have you there, and make sure everyone that you tune in for the next one. We have People Tech Talks coming up with experts. We have more founder chats coming, and of course we have demos coming soon as well. So look out for the Compensation IQ demo that will be dropping as well.